Host 1, The Skeptic. Welcome to the debate. Concrete jungle harvest. Can you really feed yourself from a balcony? Today we analyze the ideas from the book The Urban Oasis, Maximizing Your Harvest in Any Small Space. And, we are really looking at a fundamental, almost primal human desire here.
Oh, absolutely. That urge to achieve food independence.
Right, to cultivate nature, to literally pull sustenance from our own living spaces. But, and here is the rub, we are trying to do this while trapped by the physical constraints, the time limitations, and, the literal concrete realities of urban living.
Yeah, it's a massive life challenge.
It really is. I mean, if you are listening to this, look at your balcony right now. It's likely a 4x4 concrete slab suspended in the air. It's either a wind tunnel, baked by direct sun, or plunged into the permanent shadow of a neighboring high-rise. To some, it looks like a barren holding cell.
Host 2, The Believer. But the proposals we are analyzing today view that exact same space as basically a high-performance engine block, just waiting to be tuned.
Well, I'm not so sure about that.
I mean, I come at it from a different way. I don't see an engine block exactly. I see an ecosystem that has been stripped of its natural mechanics. And we are now highly capable of artificially reconstructing that.
Reconstructing nature on a 14th floor patio?
Exactly. But the stakes of this conversation couldn't be higher. We are fundamentally asking, can micro-scale agricultural techniques truly provide a reliable, efficient food source in urban environments?
Or does the intense, daily management required make these highly engineered systems ultimately impractical for the average person?
Host 1, The Skeptic.
Exactly. And my position today is that these highly engineered micro-gardening proposals introduce a compounding set of risks and, honestly, maintenance traps that make long-term urban self-sufficiency highly unrealistic.
Host 2, The Believer. Unrealistic? I think that's a bit harsh.
Let me finish. The vision of a balcony food factory is undeniably alluring, but I argue these proposals drastically underestimate the friction of urban constraints. When you isolate a plant in a container, you create an inherently fragile environment.
Fragile how?
You are dealing with rapid nutrient leaching, for one, and you are operating on a razor-thin margin of error when it comes to watering and light exposure. What is pitched as a stress-reducing hobby quickly morphs into a high-risk daily chore. The vigilance required just borders on the unrealistic for an average city dweller.
Okay, I hear your skepticism. But let me present the opposing view. These proposals are not about brute forcing traditional broad-acre farming into a small space. That would obviously fail.
Well, yeah, you can't put a tractor on a balcony.
Right, exactly. What we are talking about is the application of precise, calculated biological optimizations. By utilizing adapted French-intensive soil methods, highly specific plant selection, and spatial hacks like vertical scaling, these proposals create hyper-productive, resilient micro-ecosystems.
Resilient is a strong word there.
But it is resilient.
The initial setup might be calculated, but that upfront logic translates into sustained high-volume yields. We aren't just putting dirt in a pot. We are building highly efficient biological engines.
Okay, well, let's test the reality of building those biological engines, starting right at the literal foundation of these proposals, the soil and the containers holding it. Before we even talk about harvesting a single tomato, we have to look at the vessels.
The most important part.
Right. Now, the book suggests entirely abandoning native dirt in favor of specialized living soil mediums. And, the logic makes a certain amount of sense to me on paper. Traditional garden soil is a disaster in a container.
Oh, a total disaster. It compacts, it suffocates roots, it basically turns into concrete.
Exactly.
And that is why the underlying logic of the book's soil recipe is practically flawless. The proposal is to blend cocoa coir for moisture retention and structure, perlite for vital aeration, and then enrich it with high-quality compost and worm castings.
Okay, but what does that actually achieve? You're just making expensive dirt.
No, you are creating a premium living ecosystem. You aren't feeding the plant. You're feeding the microbial livestock in the soil, the bacteria and fungi, which in turn feed the plant. It's like taking a daily probiotic rather than hooking your garden up to a synthetic IV drip.
A probiotic for dirt. Okay.
But the vessel holding that soil is equally important. The proposals strongly advocate for fabric grow bags, which I think is a brilliant solution for space constraints.
Hold on.
I want to break down exactly how a fabric bag supposedly solves a space constraint better than a plastic pot of the exact same size. Because to the untrained eye, a 5-gallon container is a 5-gallon container, regardless of what it's made of.
Host to the believer. It comes down to a biological process called air pruning. Imagine a traditional plastic or terracotta pot. When a plant's roots grow out and reach the edge of that plastic, they hit a solid wall.
Right, they have nowhere to go.
Exactly. Because they have nowhere else to go, they begin to circle the bottom of the pot. They choke themselves, becoming root-bound. That severely limits their ability to uptake nutrients and water.
Okay, so what happens in the fabric bag?
In a porous fabric grow bag, the exact opposite happens.
When the root tip reaches the edge of the fabric and is exposed to the dry air outside the bag, the very tip of that root naturally dehydrates and dies back.
Wait, the root dies? That sounds harmful.
It sounds harmful, yes, but it actually triggers a survival response in the plant. It forces the plant to branch its root system internally, creating a dense, highly efficient fibrous root mass instead of a few long, circling taproots.
So it's maximizing the space inside the bag.
Exactly. You are literally maximizing the biological efficiency of the root zone within a heavily constrained volume. A plant in a 5-gallon fabric bag can absorb significantly more water and nutrients than a plant in a 5-gallon plastic bucket because the surface area of its root system is exponentially larger.
You make it sound seamless, but we have to look at the physics here.
Especially the environmental reality of that exact mechanism on an urban balcony. The air pruning happens because the fabric breathes.
Right. That means water is constantly evaporating from the sides of the container, not just the top. If you're living on the 14th floor in Chicago, that balcony isn't a meadow. It's a wind tunnel. A fabric grow bag exposed to city winds and direct sun is going to dry out in a matter of hours. Are we building a garden or an intensive care unit for plants?
I mean, calling it an intensive care unit is a bit much. It requires monitoring, yes, but that's where the rich organic matter and the soil mix comes into play. That cocoa coir and compost act as a massive sponge to hold moisture, buffering the evaporation. I'm not convinced by that line of reasoning because of a specific physical process you just have to deal with in highly aerated containers, nutrient leaching.
Leaching happens in nature too.
Yeah, but the plant isn't trapped in nature. Every time you water that well-draining soil mix to keep the plant alive in the wind, the water flows out of the bottom, literally washing away dissolved nitrogen, potassium, and trace minerals.
Well, you just have to...
The plant's roots cannot reach deeper into the earth to find more sustenance like they would in a backyard. So the proposals mandate this constant treadmill of applying liquid fish emulsions, brewing compost teas, and adding organic granular feeds. You are artificially keeping these isolated, nutrient-starved containers alive on life support.
It's not life support.
I have to ask, is it realistic to expect a busy urbanite to brew compost tea in their tiny apartment kitchen just to keep their balcony radishes from turning yellow?
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that framing. Calling it an intensive care unit ignores the reality that any high-performance system requires fuel. You don't build a high-yield system and then expect it to run on nothing.
But a treadmill of fish emulsion?
The periodic application of worm castings, or liquid organic feed, isn't a treadmill. It's a basic rhythm of cultivation. By feeding that soil microbiology, you are creating a sustained nutrient pipeline. It's a proactive, gentle feeding system that is far superior to dumping harsh synthetic fertilizers into the ground. It reconnects the urbanite to the actual biology of food production.
Okay. But even if you perfectly dial in that soil biology to act as a sponge, and you somehow master the rhythm of feeding without making your apartment smell like fish, you eventually run out of square footage.
Which is why we look up.
Exactly. That's where the book suggests a pivot that I think introduces a whole new level of physical risk, building upward. Let's examine the push for vertical scaling.
Vertical integration is a mathematically undeniable way to increase harvest volume. Think about it. If you have a 5-by-5-foot patio, you only have 25 square feet of horizontal growing space. That's a hard limit.
Right, you can't magically make the concrete bigger.
But if you have two walls that are 8 feet high, you suddenly have an additional 80 square feet of vertical canopy to exploit.
The proposals suggest utilizing wall-mounted pockets, tiered shelves, and robust trellises.
And that's a lot of weight on a wall, by the way.
Sure, but this is where specific plant selection becomes genius. You use determinate tomatoes, varieties genetically programmed to grow to a compact, fixed height in your ground-level pots, so they stay bushy.
Okay.
But for that vertical airspace, you switch strategies. You select indeterminate varieties, the climbing vines, and you train them explicitly up a trellis. You are literally pulling food out of dead urban airspace.
I see why you think that is a mathematical triumph, but let me give you a different perspective on the physics of going up. As you move higher off the ground, especially in an urban canyon, wind speed increases and relative humidity drops precipitously.
That's true, but the proposals themselves admit that vertical systems dry out incredibly rapidly due to this increased sun and wind exposure. Furthermore, geometry dictates that if you use tiered shelves, the top tier casts a permanent shadow on the lower tiers. You are trading horizontal space constraints for severe vertical light and moisture deficits.
Which is exactly why the proposals emphasize strategic placement and automated irrigation. You put your shade-tolerant leafy greens like Swiss chard, spinach, and arugula on the lower, shadowed tiers. They actually prefer the cooler microclimate.
Assuming they get any light at all.
They get ambient light. You put your sun-loving herbs on the top, and to counter the rapid evaporation, you install drip irrigation lines.
A simple timer connected to your spigot, running a network of quarter-inch drip tubes, ensures every single plant gets precisely the water it needs. It completely eliminates the manual watering burden you were worried about earlier.
I hear the theory, but imagine the reality of what you just described. We started this journey looking for a simple, primal connection to nature, and now we are installing miles of microtubing, pressure regulators, and automated electronic water timers on a fire escape.
It's just a few tubes.
Does the mandatory installation of complex plumbing negate the very simplicity we're trying to achieve? And let's talk about the fragility of that automation. City waters is notoriously hard.
Oh, calcium buildup.
Yes!
If a single 1 gallon per hour drip emitter clogs with calcium buildup, which happens constantly in these microsystems, the plant in that specific vertical pocket dies in a single afternoon because it has absolutely zero ground moisture buffer.
Host 2, the believer. Well, it's a calculated trade-off. Yes, you might spend a Saturday afternoon measuring tubing and setting up a drip system. And yes, you should check your emitters occasionally. But that small investment of time buys you an entire season of automated hydration. That is the definition of practical efficiency. You leverage a small amount of technology to solve a massive biological hurdle.
Host 1, the skeptic. Assuming the plumbing works perfectly, and the structures don't blow over or dry out, we arrive at the next critical filter. What actually survives to be harvested in these tight quarters?
Host 2, the believer. Quite a lot, actually.
Well, you are creating a biological oasis in a concrete desert. And you know what an oasis attracts? Everything. Every bug for miles.
Let's talk about yield realities, plant selection, and the inevitable reality of pest warfare. Host 2, the believer. This is where the proposals truly shine, through the concept of smart sowing. You don't plant a giant pumpkin on a balcony. You focus on rapid efficiency. You plant fast-maturing crops like radishes that go from seed to harvest in just 30 days.
30 days is fast, sure.
You utilize the cut-and-come-again method for leafy greens, harvesting the outer leaves of lettuce or kale while leaving the center growing tip intact, which forces the plant to continuously regenerate foliage. And you employ succession planting.
Meaning you basically never leave an inch of soil bare?
Exactly.
The exact minute you pull a mature radish out of the soil, you slide a new seedling right into that empty space. And to address your point about pests, you use biology to fight your battles through companion planting.
Ah, the marigolds.
Yes. In intensive microgardens, you pair marigolds with your tomatoes because the roots of the marigolds exude a chemical that repels microscopic root knot nematodes in the soil.
You interplant dill and cilantro specifically to attract predatory insects like ladybugs and lacewings, which naturally prey on aphids. It's creating a self-defending, continuous yield ecosystem.
That's an interesting point, though. I would frame the reality on the ground quite differently. The romantic idea of ladybugs peacefully migrating to a high-rise balcony to guard your tomatoes sounds idyllic.
They will find it, maybe, but high-density planting creates severe structural vulnerabilities. The French intensive method historically worked in large beds. When you pack plants that tightly together in a tiny urban footprint to maximize yield, you completely choke off air circulation. In a city where air is already prone to being stagnant between buildings, a dense canopy becomes an absolute breeding ground for fungal diseases.
Fungal diseases can be managed with proper pruning.
Managed, yes, but at what cost to the gardener's time? Powdery mildew thrives when warm, humid days turned into cool city nights. One damp evening, and your entire vertical wall of greens looks like it was dusted with flour. That fungus coats the leaves, stops photosynthesis dead in its tracks, and stunts growth immediately.
Which is why the proposals emphasize aggressive sanitation.
Removing dead or infected leaves the moment you see them, and careful pruning to open up the center of the canopy so the wind can actually flow through.
Host 1, the skeptic. But that is exactly my point about the labor. You are asking someone to meticulously prune and sanitize a vertical wall of vegetation daily. And as for the pests, companion planting is wonderful in a large open field where biodiversity naturally exists.
Host 2, the believer. It works in containers too.
Host 1, the skeptic.
On an isolated balcony, if spider mites or aphids find your stressed, nutrient-leaching container plants, the natural predators rarely arrive in time to save the crop. The sustainable, long-term reality for high-density balcony farming isn't waiting for ladybugs. It's the gardener intervening constantly. It's spraying pungent neem oil and insecticidal soaps week after week just to keep the infestation at bay.
Host 2, the believer.
I wouldn't call it a constant battle. I'd call it active stewardship. You have to monitor the undersides of leaves, yes. When you apply neem oil, you're using a natural substance that disrupts the hormonal life cycle of pests so they forget to eat and reproduce. And it acts as a mild fungicide to fight that powdery mildew.
Still smells awful.
Well, it is an organic, highly effective intervention. You are observing life closely, intervening thoughtfully, which is exactly the connection in nature that urbanites are seeking. It's rewarding work, not a punishment.
Okay, let's escalate this to the logical extreme. When physical soil limitations, weight restrictions, and pest management become seemingly insurmountable, the methods in the book suggest pushing the boundary entirely into water-based systems.
My favorite part. We leave traditional horticulture behind and enter the realm of bioengineering, hydroponics, and aquaponics. Now, I know the book pushes the Kratky method in deep water culture, where you're essentially removing soil entirely. The claim is that by removing the soil barrier, the plant doesn't waste metabolic energy. But from my perspective, removing that soil barrier also removes your only safety net.
No, it's the ultimate triumph of urban agricultural efficiency. Think about it. If soil volume and weight are your primary limiters on a balcony, remove the soil entirely. Hydroponics allows us to suspend bare roots directly in a highly oxygenated, nutrient-rich water solution.
And Kratky is the simplest version of that.
Right. The book outlines the Kratky method for absolute simplicity, where a plant sits in a net cup above a static jar of nutrients.
You leave an air gap between the cup and the water line, so the upper roots breathe oxygen while the lower roots drink. But the true powerhouse is deep water culture, or DWC.
Host 1, the skeptic.
Right, where you introduce active oxygenation.
Host 2, the believer.
Exactly. It comes down to energy expenditure. In soil, a plant has to expend massive amounts of metabolic energy, pushing its roots through dense, heavy matter to seek out microscopic pockets of water and trace minerals.
Host 1, the skeptic.
It has to work for a living.
Right.
But in a DWC system, you use an electric air pump and an air stone to constantly bubble oxygen through a liquid nutrient solution that directly bathes the bare roots. The plant spends zero energy searching for food. It absorbs nutrients instantly and effortlessly. This accelerates vegetative growth exponentially. You get larger yields, faster, in a fraction of the footprint. And you completely eliminate soil-borne pests and diseases because, well, there is no soil.
Host 1, the skeptic. And when we push this to the absolute extreme, the book suggests aquaponics. I want to map out what this actually entails, because on paper it sounds like magic.
Host 2, the believer. Aquaponics closes the biological loop beautifully. You connect a fish tank, say raising edible tilapia or even just ornamental goldfish, to your hydroponic grow bed.
Okay.
The fish eat and produce waste rich in ammonia. Naturally occurring beneficial bacteria in your system convert that toxic ammonia into nitrites and then into nitrates. Nitrates are the exact perfect form of nitrogen that plants need to thrive.
The plants just filter the water.
Yes, the plants consume the nitrates, perfectly filtering and purifying the water, which then cycles back down to the fish tank. It is a miniature, self-sustaining, zero-waste ecological engine right in your living room or on your balcony.
Host 1, the skeptic. I have to push back hard here because the fragility of this setup is staggering. We have transitioned from planting a seed in the dirt to operating a digital biological processing plant. To make hydroponics or aquaponics work, you have to do daily monitoring of pH levels and EC.
Host 2, the believer.
It's really not that hard.
Host 1, the skeptic. For those unfamiliar, EC stands for electrical conductivity. It's how you measure the exact density of dissolved nutrient salts in the water.
EC is just a simple digital measurement. It takes 5 seconds to dip a handheld meter into the reservoir.
But if that EC number is off, or your pH drifts outside of the very narrow 5.5 to 6.5 range, the roots instantly lock out nutrients. The plant literally starves to death while floating in a vat of food. It's a digital gardening nightmare. And we haven't even touched on the environmental dependencies.
Environmental dependencies?
These systems require electricity. They require buzzing air pumps, water pumps, and often artificial lighting. It introduces constant noise pollution into a small apartment. But the fatal flaw is the complete lack of a biological buffer.
Okay, but
If an urban power outage knocks out your air pump in a deep water culture system, the roots consume all the dissolved oxygen in the water within hours. They begin to drown and rot. If you lose power in an aquaponics system, your fish suffocate, the ammonia spikes, and your entire aquatic and botanical food supply is wiped out overnight. Is this highly precarious, electrified water tank actually a resilient solution for a major life challenge? That's a compelling argument, but have you considered that total grid failure is a rare edge case for most urban centers? For the 364 days a year the power is on, you are producing food at a velocity that soil gardening simply cannot touch.
Host 1, the skeptic. I mean, a blown fuse isn't a rare edge case.
Okay, sure, you have to be careful with your breakers. Yes, it is clinical. Yes, it requires a pH meter instead of a trowel. But if the goal is truly maximizing harvest in a tiny footprint, ignoring the science of hydroponics is just clinging to nostalgia. The data is absolutely clear. Suspending roots in oxygenated nutrients is mathematically the most efficient way to grow biomass.
So it seems we arrive at the core tension of this entire discussion.
The methods we've analyzed from the urban oasis, whether it's mixing custom living soils for fabric bags, engineering vertical drip irrigated walls, or balancing the precise chemistry of a hydroponic reservoir, they represent an incredible leap in agricultural science applied to the microscale.
Truly incredible.
But my position remains that the compounding maintenance, the precise environmental monitoring, and the incredibly high stakes of this infrastructure make it a fragile endeavor. The urban constraints of wind, shadow, and space turn what could be a simple joy of connecting with nature into a demanding, almost clinical management job.
And I will reassert that the logic of these methods holds up precisely because they are engineered to overcome those hurdles. With the right strategic frameworks, you don't just survive urban constraints, you exploit them.
Exploit them, huh? Absolutely. By choosing determinate plants, leveraging the exact physics of root air printing, utilizing succession planting, and embracing the exponential growth of water-based systems, you can undeniably transform a tiny footprint into a highly efficient, high-yield food engine. The upfront design and the daily stewardship are a feature, not a bug. They reconnect the urbanite to the fundamental mechanics of life and sustenance.
Both perspectives reveal that tackling this life challenge is no small feat. The ideas presented in the Urban Oasis provide an incredibly powerful toolkit for anyone looking to maximize their yield. If you're willing to deeply learn the science and commit the time, they are absolute must-try methodologies.
They really are, but they must be approached with caution and with eyes wide open to the steep requirements for daily vigilance, plumbing, and infrastructure maintenance.
Exactly. It demands a total shift in mindset. You aren't just casually planting a seed, you are actively engineering life.
We started this conversation by looking at a standard concrete balcony and asking if it was a barren cell or an engine block waiting to be tuned. The reality is it can absolutely be an engine, a high-performance food-producing machine. But you have to ask yourself, are you truly prepared to be the mechanic every single day?
That's the real question.
Thank you for joining us on The Debate. We will see you next time.